Good evening. I'm Haylee Ficuciello, Senior Correspondent for Englebrook Independent News. Tonight, we take a comprehensive look at some of the most significant federal criminal prosecutions announced during the final week of May of 2026 across the Great Plains and southern central United States. Federal prosecutors from Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and Louisiana reported major developments involving drug trafficking organizations, violent crimes, firearm offenses, murder cases, child exploitation investigation, sex trafficking operation, immigration violation, financial fraud scheme, and organized criminal enterprises. Let's begin tonight in Montana. Federal prosecutors in Montana report an exceptionally busy month with major prosecutions involving narcotic trafficking, violent assault, homicide cases, firearm offenses, and immigration crimes. In Minnesota, Miguel Vincenzo Derrick and Summer Dawn Walren were sentenced for trafficking methamphetamine from Spokane, Washington into Montana. Walraven received 4 years in federal prison. Derrick received nearly 12 years in prison after authorities also connected him to possession of firearms and furtherance of drug trafficking. Federal prosecutors say the pair traveled across state lines to obtain methamphetamine intended to distribute in Minnesota. Meanwhile, in Great Falls, Alta Rose Chandler was sentenced to 18 months in prison for participating in a brutal assault that ultimately resulted in the death of a victim identified in court documents as John Doe. According to prosecutors, Chandler and co-defendant Heavenly Jerwan Sears spent a night drinking before attacking the victim inside his home on the Fort Delmenek Reservation. The victim suffered catastrophic injuries and later died from a traumatic brain injury. Sears was previously sentenced in March. Federal drug investigations also secure a guilty plea for several defendants tied to methamphetamine and fentanyl trafficking operation. Joshua Jacob Best of Billings admitted to participating in a multi-state trafficking network linked to Mexico that moved narcotics throughout Wyoming, South Dakota, California, and Montana. Investigators allege Best coordinated drug and cash transfers involving tens of thousands of dollars and was connected to shipments containing more than 57 pounds of methamphetamine and kilograms of cocaine. Harold Eldwin Main of Harlan pled guilty after authorities discovered methamphetamine, fentanyl pills, digital scales, packaging material, and drug paraphernalia. One disturbing detail from the court records revealed fentanyl pills were allegedly hidden beneath the leg of a child riding in the Maine's car. In another immigration case, Mexican national Isaiah Martinez Arias pled guilty to possession of fraudulent permanent resident card and illegally re-entering the United States after prior deportation. Federal prosecutors also announced the sentencing of Michael J. Ackerman, 74 of Poplar. Ackerman received more than 15 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to second-degree murder and using a firearm during a violent crime. Investigators say Ackerman admitted to killing 3 individuals in September of 2025 after claiming he believed they were attempting to set him up. Additional Montana cases include fentanyl trafficker Zachary Taylor Cortez, domestic assault offender Lane Blake Kindley, and methamphetamine trafficker Nathaniel John Schoen. All received federal conviction connections to major investigations. In Wyoming, federal prosecutors announced the sentencing of Leonard Raymond Rifle of Cheyenne. Rifle received 10 years in federal prison after authorities discovered nearly 1 pound of methamphetamine, carfentanil pills, drug packing material, and distribution equipment during the investigation. Carfentanil is considered one of the most dangerous synthetic opioids ever encountered by law enforcement and is significantly more potent than fentanyl. Authorities later recovered a firearm and ammunition from Rifle's residence. Because of his felony record, prosecutors argued that he was prohibited from possessing firearm. A federal grand jury in North Dakota has indicted Brutus Claymore, an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sussex tribe, on charges of first-degree murder. According to prosecutors, Claymore allegedly forced entry into Fort Yacht's residence during an attempted robbery in November of 2014 and fatally stabbed a resident. The indictment follows years of investigation conducted jointly by the Bureau of Indian Affairs Missing and Murdered Units and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Claymore's trial is currently scheduled for June 23rd of 2026. As always, an indictment is merely an allegation, and the defendant remains presumed innocent unless proven guilty in the court of law. A South Dakota federal court reported some of the region's most serious violent crimes and narcotic prosecutions. And Pierre Floyd Clown Jr. was sentenced to 5 years in prison after pleading guilty to abusive sexual contact involving a woman on the Cheyenne River, Sussex Reservation. In Sussex Fall, Carrie Ludens received more than 13 years in federal prison for participating in a methamphetamine trafficking organization that transported narcotics from Arizona into South Dakota. Investigators attributed approximately 22 pounds of methamphetamine to Ludens. In Rapid City, Eli Poorman was sentenced to 5 years in prison after attempting to receive child pornography and arranging what he believed he would be a sexual encounter with a 13-year-old girl who had actually been an undercover officer. Federal prosecutors also secured a life sentence against Reno Rundu of Madison. Jurors convicted Rundu for first-degree felony murder and arson after prosecutors proved his intentionally set a fire to an occupied residence, killing Tanya White Butterfly and seriously injured another victim. Additional major sentences include Jamie Claremont and Kenyu Marshall, each receiving 5 years for voluntarily manslaughter. Juan Sanchez, a Denver-based drug trafficker leader, received 45 years in federal prison for distributing approximately 500 pounds of methamphetamine and more than 33,000 fentanyl pills throughout the western South Dakota. Jason Gomez received 11 years for attempting to entice a minor. Jeremy Oldhorse sentenced for 6.5 years for assaulting and strangulation causing severe bodily injuries. Federal prosecutors in Nebraska announced 10 newly unsealed indictments charging 12 defendants. Charges include burglary of the United States Post Office, large-scale methamphetamine trafficking, escape from federal custody, assault on federal officer, fentanyl distribution conspiracies, firearm offenses, illegal re-entry cases. Among the most serious cases is Victor Galbato Perez of Ralston, who faces 7 counts involving firearm, cocaine trafficking, marijuana trafficking, and possession of a firearm during drug crimes. Federal prosecutors also announced the sentencing of Brian Morales of Omaha. Morales received 126 months in federal prison after investigators discovered extensive collection of child pornography obtained through Facebook and WhatsApp chats groups over multiple years. In another disturbing case, Kavan Kumar Patel, an Indian national unlawfully present in the United States, was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for sex trafficking 2 minor girls in Omaha. Federal investigators found the victim had been transported from out of state and exploited for commercial sex acts while housed at a local hotel. Federal authorities in Colorado announced a sweeping multiple defendant drug and money laundering indictment involving 9 individuals accused of trafficking fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin throughout Denver metropolitan area. Several defendants also face money laundering conspiracy charges tied to alleged narcotic enterprises. Federal prosecutors separately indict Mexican national Rodrigo Alcran Palmas on charges of laundering drug proceeds throughout cryptocurrency transactions allegedly connected to Sinaloa cartel networks. In a major financial fraud case, Emily Catherine Murrell of Cypress, Texas, was indicted for allegedly stealing more than $3 million from 2 Colorado-based employers for fraudulent financial transactions and falsified records. Meanwhile, Brian Graham of Georgia was sentenced to 37 months in federal prison after fraudulently obtaining COVID-era PPP and EIDL funds. Federal grand juries in Kansas returned numerous indictments involving arson, fire offense, narcotic trafficking, illegal re-entry, and theft of government property. One of the most notable cases involves Johnny Griffin of Ketchie. Prosecutors allege Griffin intentionally set fire to Wichita duplex and illegally possessed multiple firearms despite being a convicted felon. In Wichita federal court, 21-year-old Zane Titcock received 21 years in prison after carrying out a series of armed bank robberies in late 2024. Investigators linked him to robberies of Intrust Bank, Enterprise Bank, and Sunflower Bank. Authorities ultimately identified him through a bait bill recovered during the investigation. Moving to Oklahoma, in Oklahoma City, Chance Trevon Berg was sentenced to more than 11 years in federal prison. Prosecutors say Berg held a firearm to a victim's head during a violent apartment robbery and repeatedly struck the victim with the weapon. Judge Patrick Reich cited Berg's lengthy criminal history in imposing the sentence. In eastern Oklahoma, Pedro Ramirez Cornambes, a previously deported Mexican national with prior murder conviction in Texas, received 37 months in federal prison for unlawfully re-entering the United States. We now look at Texas and Louisiana. Federal courts along the Gulf Coast report some of the most significant child exploitation, sex trafficking, narcotic, and immigration prosecutions in this month. In Corpus Christi, Texas, Melissa Sillers was sentenced to 13 years in federal prison for receiving and distributing sexual abuse material. Investigators discovered extensive online communication involving child exploitation images and videos. In Houston, a federal jury convicted Jonathan Smith Byard on multiple sex trafficking charges. Evidence showed he trafficked women and minors across several states while maintaining control through violence, intimidation, and severe physical abuse. Federal prosecutors also announced extradition of Cuban national Mikel Serrano Castillo from Panama to face sex trafficking, extortion, cyberstalking, coercion-related charges. Meanwhile, federal authorities filed charges against Juan Ala Morato, an illegal alien accused of opening fire on multiple individuals with an AR-style rifle during a Memorial Day weekend confrontation in New Caney. Federal prosecutors further report filings of 259 immigration-related criminal cases during a single week as a part of ongoing broader security operation. In Louisiana, New Orleans resident Kendrick White pled guilty to sexually abusing a 15-year-old girl aboard a cruise ship while the vessel was in international waters. Federal prosecutors also announced 20 years in prison for Benjamin Holmes following a fentanyl trafficking and firearm conviction, a guilty plea for Robert Polk involving drug trafficking and firearm offenses, a sentence of nearly 12 years for methamphetamine distribution, Ryan Lodgy, and the sentence of Honduran national Julio Verado Sonanto following another unlawful re-entry conviction. From cartel-linked narcotic trafficking organizations and violent murders to child exploitation, sex trafficking, financial fraud, firearm offenses, and immigration-related prosecutions, federal courts across the Great Plains and South Central United States close out May 2026 with a staggering volume of significant criminal cases. Federal investigators continue emphasizing fentanyl interdictions, child exploitation enforcement, violent crime reduction, organized crime prosecution, and border security initiatives as top priorities heading into summer months. For Englebrook Independent News, I'm Haylee Ficuciello. Thank you for joining us for the Federal Crime Report. Good night and stay safe.